It's strange what sticks with you even years later. I was around 25, just starting out in a new city and working a pretty standard office job when I sublet a room to help cover rent. It seemed simple enough. A friend of a friend needed someone for a few months while they were traveling, and I needed affordable housing. Honestly, everything felt incredibly normal at the time, just a practical solution to a common problem. But it's been replaying in my head lately. The drive was uneventful, exactly what I wanted. I'd spent the last few weeks crammed into a shoebox apartment with a roommate who collected taxidermied squirrels, so uneventful felt luxurious. Mr. Abernathy, that was the guy I was subletting from, had sent pretty detailed instructions about getting the key from a lockbox. The combination was tucked under a ceramic gnome on the porch. Everything felt organized, almost overly so. He was already there when I pulled up, waiting by the front door, which was odd. I'd expected him to be leaving for his trip. He was thin, really thin, and his skin had this sort of gray sheen. He smiled, a quick, tight thing, and immediately started talking about the thermostat. Likes it kept at 68, he said, voice raspy like he hadn't used it in a while. Keeps the dampness down. Then he did it. He just walked over to the wall in the hallway, a section between the living room and the kitchen, and started hitting it. Not like punching, more like slapping. Open palm, forceful, rhythmic. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It wasn't loud, but the sound carried, and my feet just stopped working. I literally couldn't move. He didn't acknowledge me at all. Just kept hitting the wall, his head tilted slightly, eyes closed. After 10 seconds maybe he stopped, turned back to me and said, "Old house, settling." He seemed eager to explain, like he needed me to believe it was normal. I mumbled something about the thermostat, and he handed me the key, rattling off a few more rules about recycling. I think he was trying to distract me, or maybe himself. Honestly, I figured he was just eccentric. A little weird, sure, but harmless. Probably a retired engineer obsessed with structural integrity. It made a strange kind of sense, given the age of the house. I unlocked the door, desperate to get inside and put some distance between us. I tried to settle in. The damp smell was worse inside, clinging to everything. I opened a window in my room, but it didn't really help. I kept catching myself listening for the thwacking. It hadn't happened again, not while I was there. Still, I found myself avoiding the hallway. 2 days later, I came home from work, and the kitchen light was on. He wasn't supposed to be back for another 7 days. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The place was neat, impossibly neat. He'd been meticulous, but this was different. Everything was arranged, like a display, a magazine photo. I checked the back door. It was locked. All the windows were too. Then I saw it. My toothbrush. It wasn't in the holder with mine. It was in the middle of the kitchen counter, next to a small, perfectly folded hand towel, just sitting there. I grabbed it, rinsed it under the tap, and put it back with my things, trying not to think about it. Probably just a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd come back early, needed something, and I don't know. The next morning, I distinctly remembered locking my bedroom door. I always lock my bedroom door, but when I went to leave for work, it was unlocked. I told myself I was just forgetful, stressed. I started double-checking everything: keys, wallet, phone, door locked, every single time. Then I found the spare key. It was taped, with clear packing tape, to the underside of the flower pot on the porch. My key. I stared at it for a long time. He'd given me one key, just one. He must have made a copy. Maybe he's just concerned about emergencies, a good landlord type? He probably wants to make sure someone can get in if something happens to me. It's thoughtful, really. But why hide it? I should have called the police. I know that now, but I didn't. I kept thinking, maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he just liked knowing things were okay. A weird, overprotective landlord. That's what I told myself. I even started leaving little notes just to prove a point. Everything's fine. Doors locked, all good. Stupid, right? Then the water shut off. Just like that, mid-shower. Ice cold. I wrapped a towel around myself and went to the basement, figuring a pipe burst. The breaker hadn't tripped. The main valve, it wasn't the valve itself. Someone had put a padlock on it. A small brass padlock, not a standard plumbing lock. I ran upstairs, heart hammering. He wasn't due back for another 7 days, and the padlock looked brand new, like he'd anticipated this. I tried calling him and it went straight to voicemail again. I started packing a bag, just the essentials: clothes, laptop, wallet. I wasn't going to stay another night. As I was zipping up the bag, I heard a scraping sound at the back door. Slow, deliberate. Like someone was testing the lock. I froze, then a key turning. Not my key. I didn't even think. I just grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet from the kitchen, and braced myself against the door. It swung open, but not with a rush, slowly. And there was no one there. Just a small, hand-painted ceramic frog sitting on the porch swing. The same frog he'd pointed out when I first moved in, saying it brought good luck. He'd insisted I not move it. I ran. I just ran. Didn't lock the door, didn't grab anything else, just out the front and into the car. I looked back once. He wasn't there, but the frog seemed to be facing me and the water was still off. I ended up at a motel 1 hour away. One of those places where the ice machine sounds like a dying animal. I called the police, of course. I told them about the key, the locked water valve, and the frog. They came out and took a statement. The officer who came to the motel seemed mostly annoyed. He said breaking and entering required proof of breaking and entering. A missing key didn't prove anything. He suggested I just call a plumber regarding the water valve. He did drive me back to the house, which I didn't want, but he insisted on a walkthrough. He didn't find anything. He said everything looked normal. Just a cozy little place. He even commented on the frog. Cute little fella, he said, like it wasn't a threat. I hired a locksmith after that. I changed all the locks. It felt better momentarily. I even called the landlord and left a message demanding answers. He called back later, all apologetic. He said he'd misplaced a spare key and hadn't gotten around to telling me. He blamed a faulty system for the water valve and promised to have it fixed. He sounded genuinely concerned. I thought maybe I was overreacting. A stressful job, a new place, loneliness. Maybe it was all getting to me. I settled on the idea that he was just a really bad property manager, disorganized and oblivious. But then yesterday, I went back to get the rest of my things. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except the thermostat was set to 75 degrees. I always kept it at 68 degrees, and on the kitchen counter, neatly arranged, were 3 of those little ceramic frogs. 3, each facing the door. It wasn't about the house, it was about me. Something about this was meant for me specifically. I didn't call the police again. What would I even say? Someone keeps putting ceramic frogs in my house and adjusting the thermostat. They'd think I was losing it. I started sleeping with a hammer under my bed. It felt ridiculous, but necessary. I started documenting everything. Photos of the thermostat, the frogs, the doors and windows, dates and times, obsessively. I tried to talk to the landlord again. He was different. He was evasive. He kept saying he was sorry about the key and that he'd been under a lot of stress with his mother being ill. It felt flimsy, like he was building a story, not telling one. I started to think it wasn't about a spare key at all. Maybe he was letting someone else in. A friend? An ex? Someone he didn't want to involve me in. Maybe it was just a messy breakup and I was collateral damage. It felt less terrifying somehow. Just awkward. I stopped inviting people over. I canceled book club. I started ordering groceries online. The house felt smaller, more suffocating. I told myself it was temporary until I figured out what was going on. I even considered just leaving, breaking the lease, but I'd already put so much money into the place. Now, before I agree to anything, a sublet, meeting someone for coffee, even a simple phone call with a number I don't recognize, I search their name online. Not just a quick Google search, but a deep dive. Social media, public records, everything. It's exhausting. It's also routine. It's been almost 5 years since I left that house, and I still do it, every single time. It's a small price to pay, I think. A small price to pay for feeling, even for a moment, like I'm in control. It's been almost 2 years since it happened, and I still find myself thinking about that autumn. I was working a pretty standard office job back then, just trying to save up for a trip, and my life felt settled, I guess. I lived alone in a small apartment and kept a fairly predictable routine, which is why I agreed to sublet it while I was away for a few weeks. A friend of a friend needed a place, and he seemed perfectly nice. Honestly, at the time, it all felt incredibly normal and convenient. I came back early. My flight arrived one day ahead of schedule, which threw everything off. I remember calling him Mark, I think his name was, to let him know, but he didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, pretty casual, just saying I'd be back sooner. The apartment was quiet. Usually even with the street noise, there's a hum, you know? A fridge running, the building settling. It was just still. I tossed my bag on the floor and went to the kitchen. He'd left a note on the counter. A little sticky note that said, "Thanks again. Everything's good." Underneath, in a completely different pen, was a small drawing of a snail. A very detailed snail, like someone had actually taken the time to draw it. I didn't remember him being the drawing type. I figured maybe he had a kid who came to visit, or a niece or something. It was kind of sweet, honestly. Then I noticed the mail. He'd opened it. Not all of it, but a couple of bills, a magazine. I have AutoPay set up for everything, and I specifically hold my mail when I'm away. It just felt invasive somehow. I chalked it up to him being overly helpful, trying to take care of things. That evening, I was trying to unpack, and I realized my favorite mug was missing. It's a ridiculous mug, a souvenir from a trip to Maine with a lobster on it. I looked everywhere. I just couldn't find it. I was getting a little irritated, but still trying to tell myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I'd packed it separately. I checked the boxes in the hallway again. Nothing. He must have washed it and put it away somewhere strange, I thought. It's just a mug. I spent a long time looking for that mug. It sounds stupid, I know, but it was my mug, and the more I looked, the more I started really looking. Not just for the mug, I started pulling things out of cupboards and checking behind the radiator. I opened the bathroom cabinet and rearranged everything just to see if something was hidden. Nothing. Then I noticed the hand soap. It wasn't mine. I used the lavender stuff, the one in the pump. This was a plain white bar soap. It smelled cheap. I don't even buy bar soap. I distinctly remember thinking, okay, he just used up mine, but that didn't make sense. I'd left a full bottle. I went into the bedroom, and that's when it really started to get to me. I have a small jewelry box on my dresser. Nothing valuable is inside, mostly just sentimental stuff. I always keep it locked. I don't even remember the last time I opened it, but the lock was different. Not broken exactly, but like someone had fiddled with it. It wasn't quite clicking closed the same way. I opened it. Everything was still there, but it felt disturbed, like someone had been looking at it. I started going through everything. My closet, my desk drawers. I even checked under the bed, which is ridiculous. He'd been here for 1 week, and it wasn't just the mug or the soap or the jewelry box. It was the way things felt wrong. I started taking the long way home from work just in case. I kept thinking maybe he hadn't left when he said he did. Maybe he had a key made. It was the only explanation that made any sense. A spare key, a quick look around, a little weird but not malicious. I started triple checking the lock on the door every single night. I even bought one of those little door jammers, the kind you wedge under the handle. It felt over the top, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed it. The door jammer, I'd actually used it. Felt stupid even putting it in place, but there it was. It was late, 1 o'clock. I'd been catching up on work, trying to distract myself, just focusing on spreadsheets, anything to not think about it. Then I heard it, from the basement. A floorboard creaked, not just a settling sound like the house makes sometimes. This was a distinct, definite step. My breath hitched. The basement is unfinished. Cement floor, exposed beams, boxes of old Christmas decorations and stuff. No reason for anyone to be down there, especially now, especially not after he left. I told myself it was an animal, a rat maybe? Though I've never seen a rat, I always thought this old house would be riddled with them, honestly. I stood there, frozen. Then it happened again. Another creak, closer this time, and then a scrape, like something being dragged across the cement. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't an animal. Rats don't drag things. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. dialed 911 but couldn't speak, just gasped into the receiver. The dispatcher asked if I needed help, and I stammered something about noises, a possible intruder. She kept talking, asking for my address calmly, which was weirdly comforting. But then, right as I was giving her my address, the basement light flickered on. A harsh yellow glare spilled into the hallway. I could see the base of the stairs. Nothing, just darkness beyond, but the light, he must have left something down there, and the timer I set for the holidays to make it feel occupied must have kicked on. That had to be it. The dispatcher finished taking my information. I told her it was probably just a faulty timer, that I'd check it out. She said she'd send a patrol car anyway. I hung up, feeling foolish. But then I noticed something. The light wasn't flickering anymore. It was steady, solid, and the scraping sound had stopped. But now I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged breathing coming from inside the basement. The patrol car arrived quickly. 2 officers, young, tried to be reassuring. They checked the doors, windows, and even peered into the basement with flashlights. They found nothing. Probably just settling, one of them said, tapping the foundation wall. Old houses do that. The other nodded, more interested in writing in his notebook. They asked about the subletter Mark. I told them everything. He'd only been there 1 week. He was quiet. He'd left so abruptly, saying something about a family emergency. They asked for his contact information, which I gave them, feeling a little stupid. Like I'd called them over for what? To confirm my own paranoia? They didn't go into much detail about what they'd do with the information. They just said they'd look into it. After they left, I tried to convince myself it was just the house, just the old wood, the shifting ground. I even went down to the basement and flipped the timer off. It was a cheap one, the kind you plug things directly into. I checked the bulb and made sure it was screwed in tight. Everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. When I came back upstairs, my keys were gone from the hook by the door. I always put them there. I searched everywhere, under the couch cushions, in the kitchen, even in the basement again. Nothing. I figured Mark must have forgotten them when he left, panicked about his emergency. He probably didn't even realize. I'd just text him and ask him to mail them back. Then I noticed the photograph on the mantelpiece was crooked. It was a picture of my grandmother, and I'm meticulous about keeping it straight. It's a small thing, I know, but it felt deliberate, like someone had touched it just to mess with me. And then I remembered the book, the first edition I got from my grandfather, the one I kept on the bedside table. It wasn't there. It took 1 week to get the keys back. Mark mailed them with a short, apologetic note about the chaos of everything. He said he'd been completely distracted. The book never showed up. I reported both to the police again, but they didn't seem interested in a missing first edition. It felt pathetic, like I was complaining about inconveniences while something genuinely unsettling had happened. I moved after that, of course. I couldn't stay there. I found a small apartment downtown and thought concrete and other people would be safer. It wasn't the house, I told myself. It was just a bad patch, just stress. But the feeling followed me. I started checking things. Not obsessively, not at first, just a quick glance at photographs, making sure the remote was on the coffee table, not tucked under a cushion. Then it became more frequent, more thorough. I started to think maybe Mark wasn't just careless. Maybe he was collecting things. Souvenirs from his short stay. It sounded ridiculous even as I thought it, but it was the only explanation that fit the pattern. Now, I check the mattress seams every time. In hotels, in rentals, even when I'm camping. I run my hands along the edges, feeling for anything hidden, anything that shouldn't be there. It's just automatic. I don't even realize I'm doing it half the time, until my fingers are already working their way around the corners. It's been years since Mark, since the basement, since the missing book, and I still check. I was 22, working the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store to save up for a backpacking trip through Europe, and honestly, life felt pretty stable. Every night was almost exactly the same: stock shelves, clean the bathrooms, deal with the occasional drunk college student. It's been almost 2 years since then, but I still find myself thinking about that stretch of time, about how unremarkable everything seemed at first. I guess that's what stuck with me, the sheer normalcy of it all before things felt off. The graveyard shift settled back into its rhythm after him. Not the guy with $100, not directly, just the feeling of being watched even when the store was empty. It was stupid, I know, probably just adrenaline. I checked the security cameras, scanned the parking lot, even walked a loop around the perimeter. Nothing. He started coming in regularly, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. Always around 2 a.m., always the same thing. A single pack of Marlboro Reds, paid for with a crisp $100 bill. I'd have to call a manager to get change, which annoyed Mr. Henderson to no end. The guy never said much, just a mumbled, "Keep the change." He wasn't unfriendly, exactly. Just distant, like he was observing everything, but not really seeing it. What was weird, though, was how he'd stand there while I counted out the money. Not making conversation, not browsing, just watching me. Not in a creepy way, not at first, more like he was studying something. Like I was part of an experiment. I figured he was just bored, maybe lonely. This store is the only thing open for miles at that hour. One night, he asked if I was going to school. It was a completely random question, out of nowhere. I told him I'd dropped out after 1 semester saving for this trip. He just nodded slowly and said, "Travel is good. Broadens the perspective." It struck me as oddly formal, like he'd rehearsed the line. I remember thinking he seemed older than he looked, like he'd lived a lot of life. A week later, he asked about the trip again, and then, a few nights after that, he asked if I had a route planned. It felt less random, more focused. It was starting to feel like he wasn't just killing time, he was collecting information. Maybe he was a writer, working on a story. It was the only explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. He started bringing a newspaper with him, always folded to the travel section. He wouldn't read it, not exactly. He'd just scan the articles, then look up at me, ask anything new with the planning, or see any good deals. It was so strange, like he expected me to be actively researching trips for him based on what he saw in the paper. One night, I was unlocking the dumpster out back. It was overflowing with cardboard, and he was leaning against his car, reading the paper. Except he wasn't. He was looking at me, not the travel section, just watching, and there was a woman in the passenger seat. I'd never seen her before. Older, maybe his wife? They just sat there, silent, while I wrestled with the dumpster lid. I hurried back inside, feeling off. He didn't mention her, didn't acknowledge she was even there, just bought his cigarettes with $100, the usual. I started taking the back way to my car after my shift, cutting through the employee parking lot instead of walking past his car. It felt stupid, paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Then came the coffee. He asked me what kind I liked, said he was getting a second cup and wanted to bring me one. I usually just drink water, but I didn't want to be rude. He came back with black coffee, exactly how I hesitantly described it. It tasted wrong. Not bad, just off, like he'd put something in it. I only took a sip. I started dumping half my shift's coffee down the sink. I figured he was just trying to be nice, an odd, overly attentive regular. Maybe he was lonely, and I was the only person he talked to. Maybe he just liked having someone to practice being hospitable on. It felt unsettling, but I kept telling myself it wasn't dangerous. The chipped ceramic of the mug felt cold in my hand, even with the coffee inside. I'd been mostly just pushing it around, stirring, trying to avoid actually drinking any more of it. He was talking about the highway, the one that runs parallel to the store. He said they were repaving a section near Oakhaven, which would add 20 minutes to my drive home. He knew my route. I hadn't told him where I lived. "Just thought you should know," he said, and his eyes didn't leave mine. It wasn't a friendly heads up. It felt like a warning or a confirmation that he did know. Then his phone rang. He answered, mumbled something about being almost done, and then his whole demeanor shifted. He was agitated, almost frantic. He ended the call and started gathering things from his car. A duffel bag, a small cooler, a folded map. He wasn't going to buy cigarettes. He wasn't even looking at the store. He walked towards me, the duffel bag slapping against his leg. "Listen," he said, his voice low and rushed. "I need a favor, a big one." He paused. The woman in the car, the one I'd only seen once, was gone. That's when I noticed the back window was cracked, like someone had tried to get in. "My daughter," he stammered. "She's in trouble. She's at the motel, the Sunset. She needs a ride. She needs a lot of cash." He continued, "I can't go. They're looking for me." He was shoving a thick envelope towards me. It felt heavy, way too heavy for just cash. He was practically begging. My mind raced. A daughter? Was this about a family emergency? Maybe he wasn't creepy, just desperate. Maybe all the coffee, the questions, the attention, it was just him being a worried dad. I reached for the envelope, and that's when I saw it. Tucked halfway under the seat, reflecting the fluorescent lights, was my backpack, my empty backpack, the one I'd left by the counter earlier while I went to the back for a price check. The backpack that just didn't sit right. It wasn't just where it was, but how neatly it was placed. Like he'd wanted me to find it, to connect the dots. I didn't say anything about it. I just took the envelope. The money inside felt cold, almost damp. It was $900. That was way more than enough for a motel room, even for a few nights. I counted it quickly, trying not to meet his eyes. It was exactly $100 short of $1,000. I told him I couldn't do it. I said I had plans, that I wasn't comfortable. He didn't argue. He just deflated. He didn't grab the money back. He didn't yell. He just nodded slowly, like he'd expected it. "I understand," he said, but his eyes, they stayed on me. It wasn't like looking at me, it was looking through me. The next day, I called the police, just to file a report, about the backpack, about him asking for the money. They weren't exactly thrilled to take it. "Sounds like a guy down on his luck, ma'am," the officer said, "probably just trying to scam you." I asked if they could check the motel, and they said they would, but I got the feeling it was a low priority. I started paying closer attention to the customers after that. I checked who was in the parking lot, remembering faces, and I noticed he'd started coming in during my shifts, even the ones I hadn't scheduled, always with $100 for cigarettes, always asking about my day, my drive home. He'd even started bringing me a different kind of coffee, a hazelnut blend from that diner down the highway. It was thoughtful. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe he was just a lonely guy trying to be nice. Maybe the daughter was real. Then I realized my car keys weren't where I left them on the hook. They were in my coat pocket, which I never use. He must have moved them. Just to what? Show he could? It wasn't about the money, was it? It was about knowing, about control. It was the coffee that really got to me. I think not the hazelnut itself. It was good coffee, but that he remembered. That he'd actually remembered I mentioned once that I liked hazelnut. It felt calculated, like he was building something. He kept doing little things. He asked if I'd seen a local sports game on TV, knowing I hadn't. He mentioned a sale at the grocery store, a store I rarely went to. It was like he was filling in a picture of my life, piece by piece. I started leaving my keys at home, just not taking them to work. I'd walk to the bus stop, even when it was raining. It was a pain, honestly. The bus was always late, and the walk wasn't pleasant. But it felt better than that hollow feeling, the one that crawled up my spine when I realized something had been moved. I thought he was trying to prove something to someone else, that the daughter story was real, and he was demonstrating his resourcefulness, his ability to adapt, to get close to people, like he was practicing. It made a weird sort of sense in a twisted way. I quit taking the late shifts. I couldn't explain it to my manager, not really. I just said I needed a change. It meant less money, but I didn't care. I found a daytime job at a bookstore, safer, less open. Now, before I agree to anything at all, even a simple favor from a coworker, I ask myself where they were last Tuesday. It's ridiculous, I know, and it's cost me a few friendships, people thinking I'm standoffish, but I can't help it. It's just a habit now. A small price to pay, I suppose, for a little peace of mind. It's been almost 5 years. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing.